Zone 3 Podcast, we are joined today by Dr. Samuel Fahrenholtz, who's a physicist, actually works at the hospital that we work at.
Yes.
But first we have to introduce ourselves. I am Robert.
Yes, and I'm Reggie.
This is Zone 3 Podcast, and you are?
Samuel J. Fahrenholtz.
Thank you.
Nice, Dr.
Ph.D.
Fahrenholtz. Welcome.
That kind of doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. The joke is poorhouse doctor, not money doctor. Ph.D., not M.D.
Either way, you're
Oh, that's
every...
funny. Poor house versus
I'm happy
money
with
doctor.
my job.
And
yeah.
so is your mother-in-law, I'm sure. Well, introduce yourself, kind of like where you're from, talk about your kids, if you have them, if your wife, if you love her, those sort of things.
I do love my wife. My child's birthday is very soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Happy birthday.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
What
awesome.
age?
She'll be 3.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's a cute age still.
Yeah.
You
Awesome.
saw my kids as you're walking in.
I did. Yeah. They're doing
still
good.
cute. They're still
They're
cute.
cute.
Give it a couple more years.
Yeah.
But where are you originally from?
The Kansas. So in the Great Rectangle of Kansas, we've got Wichita and sort of south central-ish, and that's 500K city. And then I was on the suburbs of that. And I also lived on the way western edge of Kansas, right by Colorado, and like cut wheat in a harvester combine
You lived that life.
just for one summer, and vaccinated a few calves, that kind of
wow.
thing. So
Dang.
like a little bit of farming.
Yeah. Farm boy. I feel like that's a recurring theme on the podcast. Right?
Really?
Artsy background and a farm background.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm neither.
I know, right? Me too, technically.
Well, we work with you mostly when we see patients with devices and implants.
That's
and
right.
that kind of gets us into our today's topic, which is pretty much SAR. And I'll let you kind of explain what that is and what it stands for. But first, I'm curious, what route got you into MRI? And
Yeah.
at what point through your education did you decide that that's what you wanted to do?
So I wanted to be save the world with nuclear fusion. So there's this idea, if you in like Spider-Man 2, maybe.
Yeah.
The bad guy,
You're
Doc
speaking
Ock.
his language.
All right.
Exactly.
Doc Ock wants to save the world with nuclear fusion. I want to actually do that. That's how I got into like physics.
Okay.
And I was maybe when I was 13-ish. I went to college, year or two of that, and I realized it was going to be a pretty tough life to get there. It's what I'd call postdoc purgatory, where you finish your PhD and you do another training 2 or 3 years, and then another 2 years. It was a very long road to where you'd get to like really, where you really wanted to be. I realized that, and I had an older sister who said she was getting her degree in neuroscience, and said, I know people that are in medical physics. I think you would like it. And that's how I ended up in medical physics. MRI, just because pretty early on, I don't know how it got in my head. I actually don't have a great story for this. I just thought it was the
coolest.
Makeup one.
coolest. Right, yeah, it was the coolest. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. We agree. You're in good company with that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Well, if you would kind of dive into it, what exactly is SAR? What does it stand for?
Right. So SAR, SAR. SAR is specific absorption ratio. And it is the quantity of power being absorbed in 1 kilogram of stuff. And so to get a little more breakdown, a watt is the unit of power, so joules per second. And so watts define things like the lights in here or your microwave, all sorts of things that are running. Or like that's your charger's maybe like a 45-watt charger or something like that.
Right. Well, I know it's almost 117 degrees outside, so we had to put a wattage on that.
Well, so there is a solar, like per square meter, there's like a kilowatt, 1,000 watts per something like that per square meter of solar energy. Right now, it's probably even more. It's
Nice.
super high. So that's like watts per meter. Now we're talking about watts per kilogram. Kilogram of what? We're talking about tissue. So chunks of body. Like I weigh around 70 kilos. And if you irradiate me with a ton of joules per second, and then you average it out through my 70 kilos, it'll be something like 1 watt per kilo is like a typical SAR, 2 watts per kilo is normal mode. And now we're talking about like regulatory limits. So there's normal mode is 2 watts per kilo in the body, 3.2 in the head. It's pretty much always 3.2 in the head. Like this is the part where you look at the disclaimer for this and like look it up yourself if you need to know this, but it's 3.2 in the head, 4 watts per kilo is first level. And a lot of practices will run at first level. Some will run just at normal mode. And then there's research where the gloves are off, but you will have so infinite SAR, but like with care, and with consideration, and it's always reviewed by an institutional review board. That's like research purposes, and people are like looking over your shoulder at what you might be doing in that environment. So clinically though, normal mode, first level mode. Yeah.
What would determine when you would get into first level and when you wouldn't?
Going fast. I mean, hit pedal to the metal. If you want to go faster, more SAR usually. It's pulse sequence dependent though. So a lot of our anatomical imaging is that fast spin echo, turbo spin echo type sequences. And SAR, let's talk about where does the SAR come from when you're running an MRI? Yeah. It's the RF. So I'm trying to like how much image do I want to talk about? There's you kick it all off with an RF hit of 90 usually. So like most spin echo pulse sequences start with a 90. And then you can refocus and get your echoes and your imaging done with 180 pulses that follow up. And that's the fast spin echo, the turbo spin echo type sequences.
So you're always going to get more SAR with a turbo spin echo than you would with a spin echo?
Short answer is yes. I mean, like all things equal, yes. Okay. And so that's because like per TR, so you have a TR of 1,000 milliseconds. A spin echo just has a 90 and a 180. Right. And that the quantity of radiation you're putting in is due to that 90 and 180 hit. Now, a fast spin echo is going to have a follow-up of 180s. And so you're getting per TR more of those hits. The flip angle will change SAR. So if you you can, some pulse sequences, instead of actually having 180s, it's something different. It could be like 120, it could be 160. It's somewhere in the guts of your machine. It'll be choosing that, or you can select it yourself, depending on the platform. Right. And you'll reduce SAR if you have shallower flip angles. And the math of it is, if you double the flip angle, you're quadrupling the SAR. So it's squared. So you can actually get a lot of SAR savings by cutting the flip angle.
So would you say that's the best way?
That's one of the best ways.
One of the best ways, right?
Like the simplest way, and a lot of the automated ways, so the vendors will have like SAR assistants that sort of just do it for you.
Yeah.
They'll either just extend the TR, and that just means, like, this is like a very lazy analogy. Like, think of SAR as running the microwave. Running the microwave at 100% is like full normal mode. That's the 2 watts per kilo, 100%.
Right.
If you just do the same thing slower, so like 50%, now you have like more TR, and it's just doing the same thing, but it takes a longer time. Right. Now you can't do that infinitely, because if you're talking about a T1 contrast or something like that, you'd start breaking the contrast you're trying to get. Like you can't have...
Got to fall within your rules,
That's right? Yeah, you start breaking your contrast rules eventually.
Right. Nice.
What would you say is the importance of like monitoring SAR?
Monitoring SAR. Yeah, it's the context of implants and active implants mostly. There are...
When you say active, like anything like with copper wiring or just anything
wires,
that has a battery, pretty much?
Batteries, it's like zapping people in their spines to get rid of pain. I mean, like, there's really interesting devices that...
Right.
I only tend to learn just enough to handle the vendors should, and they usually do, have like a form that tells you how you should be scanning this thing.
So it's the manufacturer that determines the SAR restrictions and stuff like that?
The manufacturer of the implant. Right?
Yeah. Okay. What would you say is sometimes the more challenging of the devices?
Deep brain stimulators, man. Those are tough. So the lowest
specifically
limit,
like what sequence?
Those spin echoes sometimes stirs things that have more and more RF. So anything that has tons of RF. So turbo spin echoes and stir. So stir has the knockout pulse for the fat. That's something.
Right. So, I mean, and not to get too far off track, but so anytime that you're adding another RF pulse, so even like a pre-saturation band would increase your SAR.
That's also right. So you can cut, if you're digging deeper and deeper towards the bottom of that barrel of your tools to attack it, of getting that SAR low.
Just get rid of that.
Yeah, get rid of that, which is a thing I often do. Nex doesn't change it, for instance, though. Doing it, that just means longer, though.
Right.
Now, like if you go from Nex 1 to 2, you doubled the time. Now, if you're trying to cut things, if you go from next to 2 to 1, it's shorter, and that can help you because a lot of those vendors are going to say you can only image this thing for 30 minutes or something like that. Yeah. So the SAR number really won't change, but you'll get done faster. So right.
So imagine that with these devices, there's a workup process, and most of them are probably FDA approved to be MR conditional. Mm-hmm. Do you ever do any that are not FDA approved?
Yeah, and then that requires physician oversight. That's where the physician is looking at. Sometimes it's going to be the ordering provider. It depends on whatever practice you're working at. But the ordering provider and the radiologist should have a conversation that they're comfortable with the risk benefit of the benefit of this imaging, like the diagnostic value of that scan versus the off-label risk and liability of if something bad happens, you can't blame the implant vendor. Is kind of like what's going on play there.
And with a lot of these devices, one of the restrictions is that you have to use a TR coil. Will you just kind of explain what the importance of that is and how that differs from other coils? So
up till now, we kind of assume that we've been talking about the body transmit, and that's where patients in the donut and large parts of their body are being irradiated with that RF energy. TR coils, there's examples being like the birdcage head coil or the most, maybe all knee coils. I mean, look at your knee coil carefully, but pretty much all knee coils that I've encountered these days are TR coils as well. So that TR means transmit receive. So that's a coil that does both jobs. Also the body coil, that is a transmit receive coil. So if you're not using any surface coils and you're just using, that's pretty uncommon that you'd be doing that, but that is also a transmit receive coil. And so focusing on just the head one or the knee one, the RF energy that's coming from the transmit part doesn't travel very much beyond the loops that you see on that coil. And so what that means, as Robert's kind of pointing towards, is if you have implants that, and again, you have to look at the labeling carefully of the vendor, but it will often say something like only transmit receive, and you have to landmark like on the nose. It'll say something like that. And that means that they're sure that this device is physically far enough away from the head where it's actually being irradiated. Yeah.
All right, so kind of get a little imagery from it. So pretty much what you're saying too about the coils is that the big body coil, the main magnet BO, is also a transmit receive coil.
Yes.
So it's like a giant head coil, right? So when you're sending an RF using that coil, you're actually adding that RF to a lot of the extra body parts that you're not actually looking at. Versus when you're doing just the brain coil, you're actually being able to localize that RF a lot better.
Yes.
Pretty much nice.
Or the knee. Let's talk about the knee a little bit. Yeah. Why do they make knee a TR coil?
Because they do not want the other knee involved?
Yeah, that's right. So that's an example of that RF energy being limited just to the unilateral knee you're imaging. The bilateral, the contralateral, the other knee.
Yeah.
The other one, it won't get the RF excitement and won't end up in your image.
I was totally guessing on that.
I was impressed, man. That was quick.
You know what I'm saying? Keep them coming.
I did not feed that.
Well, this is all very interesting to me. What so far have you found to be the most interesting part of this? Because it's a challenge, right?
It is.
It's evolving too, right? Because there's a bunch of ways that you can actually monitor that same type of, I guess I want to call it SAR, but energy absorption in the body, or
it's energy absorption. It's SAR. And it is changing. So it changes through. This is a part I don't exactly understand all of, or even much of, is what the FDA requires of a vendor to get the labeling that they do. So I know they test these things, how much they tug, how much they twist, how much they absorb that RF energy, how much they heat up and burn. These are like the sorts of things they test outside of people. And then in clinical trials, they look at them carefully and that sort of thing. And the FDA gives them, they submit to the FDA, as I understand it, these are how we think we can scan it. FDA looks at their evidence and says yes or whatever. And that's how the labeling comes up. As a physicist, I don't get to see what evidence they submitted. So now we're kind of talking about if I wanted to assist physicians in looking at going off-label, it's essentially never that I've seen the conditions at which they. So I guess what I'm trying to get to say is sometimes there's evidence that says do not exceed these, and you'd start burning someone, or like really catastrophic things would happen, or it's like we just didn't test it, we don't know,
so we're not.
We're not
I
sure
see what you're saying. Yeah.
And from my perspective, that can be pretty frustrating in terms of thinking that I bet I could. So going back to the TR coil, so it's fairly once in a while there's situations where I bet I could scan it very safely, like incredibly safely with a TR coil. But it's not in the labeling because they probably didn't go to the trouble of testing it. Yeah, that's right. And this situation, are you familiar with the street artist Banksy? So he...
Actually, yeah, I am.
Okay, so I think, let's call out to Banksy wherever you are.
Big shout out.
He's like a pseudonymed street artist that does like social justice.
Does he do like it's like a girl that pulls away like a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like sometime later...
I don't know, put a little...
Can we pull up something?
Pull up something.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave. Yeah. Dave, wake up. Dave, wake... No, I'm joking.
Yeah. He's very attentive.
Yeah. We got this screen.
MRI Physicist is his favorite subject.
So Banksy, I wish he could go to the different vendors that are out there and do some graffiti saying how frustrating it is to sometimes jump through all the hoops.
Right.
Another thing I say, here's some of the art. Some of it's just interesting. Some of it's like sort of social commentary type stuff. This would fall into social commentary.
You make a great MRI tech. That creative thinking, you know?
Yeah.
I like these sort of simplicity stuff.
Yeah. It's real nice.
Nice.
So if he went and did that, I would appreciate that.
I know, right? Banksies, if you're hearing us, go to all the manufacturers of MRI implants.
Physicist version.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, I know because like Siemens has an SED, and then there's this B1 RMS.
Right.
So like there's this energy that everyone's trying to calculate, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess there's more and more ways, or at least I was never familiar with B1RS till just a couple of years ago. And are these something new? Like how different are these from SAR, I would say?
They are all pretty tightly related. Mm-hmm. So, how to say, B1 RMS is newer, and it has the advantage of, let's actually reverse to SAR just a little bit. The different vendors have a model for SAR. They sort of have an assumed, and again, this is all very proprietary, and this is sort of just me like making it up as the narrative that's in my own brain of what's
right, that's what me and Robert do all the time.
Yeah, it's like good enough. So they have these different models of different heights, weights, where you're scanning, and they will either be more conservative or more aggressive. They're all pretty conservative, is my assumption, but like one vendor might be more conservative than another, say, whatever.
Right.
And it looks at, I'm transmitting this much power, and this person's got this shape, weight, or whatever, and here's the SAR that comes out of it. They have this model, and it has some assumptions in it. B1 RMS is...
And that's why, I'm sorry, with SAR, it's like body part-wise or whole body, like that? Because I've seen that on the scanner,
all of those things. So there's a whole body one, there's a head one. If you're using just the TR coil, there's ones that they'll say they're just like the irradiated part.
Right.
Stuff like this.
Or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
B1 RMS is more of a closer to just a physical measurement that's coming, like very few assumptions go into B1 RMS relatively.
More accurate then?
Yeah, it's more accurate or more precise. I think actually you could say technically both. It's accurate and precise. And a huge advantage of it is for the pulse sequence you're applying, it won't change depending on the patients. It actually doesn't care about the patient model. So if you have a certain T1 set up, prescribed on me, and you put on someone else that has a very different body size than me, the B1 RMS will not change, but the SAR could be pretty different and typically higher for bigger people.
Right. Yes, because I noticed like there was a time where you literally depended on the body weight that you put in.
Yes.
Would be how soon you would SAR out on the scanner. So sometimes, not that we ever did it, but we heard that people would exaggerate the body weight just to kind of get
That would
past
be
that.
unethical,
but-
Reggie.
Yeah. So B1 RMS seems like that's the solution to that because you at least get the
It will still SAR out, though.
energy.
So this B1 RMS is most useful, at least in my experience,
Right.
with dealing with these implants, because they will have a SAR limit almost always, and then sometimes they'll have a B1 RMS. The B1 RMS one is an easier target to hit
Right.
in all of the cases I've ever encountered. And the other advantage of it with it is, again, if you change out patients, that B1 RMS number will not change.
Right. Well, because
idea.
so the B1 RMS sounds like it's just solely kind of dependent on the energy that's actually being transmitted, whereas the SAR is more of the energy in the body part that energy is being absorbed in type of thing.
You're dancing around an idea that I could elucidate a little more, which is, so what is B1 RMS like physically?
Yeah, I guess.
You have the transmitted RF, and what tips those, what flips the flips, what tips the tips is the
Rap
New
song.
T-shirt.
what makes those flips is the magnetic part of, so like EM, electromagnetic waves is what light is. That's what the RF is that's doing the tipping.
Right.
It's the magnetic part that allows the tipping to happen. Now, there's also associated with that, because it is an electromagnetic radiation. I've actually danced around. I'm trying to avoid wave. We can talk about wave later. That's a physics nerd problem. Is our MRI system a wave, RF wave? No, it's not. But that's like another thing. Anyway, the RF radiation has an electro and a magnetic part. The electro part is causing the heating, the SAR, and the magnet part is doing the flipping. And that's why B1 RMS does not change, but SAR does. And so let's unpack that idea. So you have B1 RMS is what's getting the flip angles you need to get whatever pulse sequence you're applying at the moment. And that's, again, why it doesn't matter changing patients around, because you always need that same flip angle to achieve the image contrast and whatever is going on in that pulse sequence.
Right.
But the amount of radiation you have to put in to make those flip angles happen on different people does change, and then the SAR changes with that.
Oh, for sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this normal conversation talk around the Thanksgiving dinner? Does your family get this? You said your sister's into this.
She's a neuroscientist. So we talk about things she talks about. My wife has a Ph.D. in bioengineering, so we talk about those things. My father and his brother and a cousin on that side are physician. My father passed away, but his brother and that cousin have MD. Yeah, I mean, like, it
Similar
comes
conversations, right?
It comes up.
That's awesome. No, I know, and I like to call it the SAR monster, because once the SAR gets on you or on the patient per se, it's so much harder to kind of mitigate it, right? So what are some kind of precursor things? I know we talked about flip angles and things like that. Like, if you know that it's going to be a high SAR sequence, like, what are some of the mitigating factors that you can kind of preemptively kind of use to kind of keep that down?
Right. So for the context of me personally, it's usually when I'm trying to hit lower SAR targets, and that's going to be 0.1s are a bad day at the office. 0.4, 0.8, you can kind of work with that, and those are the fun challenges, because like you don't feel totally futile. You can get something going. What are the tools at your disposal? The easiest ones are, in my opinion, things that change the RF transmission itself. So different vendors have different technical solutions to doing it, but it either shapes the RF pulse a little differently, or it plays out slower. It's kind of like these different strategies that they do. Those, in my opinion, are close to for free in most. There's maybe some like physics ninjas out to slay me now, but those are for free.
No free lunch in MRI.
There's no
right?
free lunch. There's no free lunch, but like it's not going to mess with your contrast too much.
Right.
Your SAR is just going to suddenly go down by a fair bit. Like throwing out a number, let's say 30%. Like it's a fair chunk down.
Right.
And it'll do things like make your slice profiles less precise, and so you can get like crosstalk if your slices are not lined up nicely, or you can get
Right.
just thicker slices than what you intended. Like it'll say 4 millimeters thick slice, and you're actually imaging something a little different.
0.2 or something. Yeah.
But
yeah.
Just click that tailored RF on GE or
Right.
anyway. Like there's
One of-
the vendors
yeah.
have a little button you can click to activate that, or a low SAR mode on Siemens. I think is what I'm familiar with.
Right. Nice.
Those are close to for free, and then TR is like the straightforward, lazy option up until you're like ruining your T1 contrast and things like that.
Right.
And then there's
So TR you would increase it then. Is what you're saying.
increase TR.
Right.
Yeah. Now, one sort of catch of TR is you can image, say, for certain pull sequence setup, you can image, say, 10 slices. Now, if you increase TR, you can start imaging like 11, 12, 13 slices at once.
Right.
Say you're trying to catch 30 slices. Now, all of a sudden, you're putting more slices
within that.
within
given
that.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
and that'll actually bump up your SAR, which gets us to the point of like, don't use auto TR if you're really trying to tune this up.
Right.
And if you're
That's always going to bottom out your TR
Mm-hmm.
every time. That makes sense. Yeah.
and one more trick that's kind of coming to mind is along the lines of doing less slices at once. So if you're imaging those 30 slices, you might just have to break up into different series so that you're encoding only like 5 at them in time or something like that. Because as you encode more slices at once, that bumps up your SAR.
Do you find that radiologists are helpful with reducing unnecessary imaging? Like, for example, like,
Yeah.
hey, we don't need this sequence.
Right. That's a conversation of when you're looking at a protocol and you're looking at the vendor restrictions, might recognize this is either such a short time restricted or a low SAR. And that's where a conversation with the physician, where either you can ask them to like look at the first few series and they'll decide, I need these ones. They call their shots, right? And or even before the patient is on the table, they might say, we might not need these, that kind of thing.
Do you find the ones that have the more difficult restrictions that they're usually older devices, or even the newer ones still have these restrictions?
Or are they mostly just off-label?
I think it is generally correct to say that older devices have trickier labeling to deal with. But yeah, there's new devices that once in a while have pretty restrictive labeling.
Right.
So is it frustrating for you when there's this stigma out there in MR that like pacemakers can't be scanned and aneurysm clips can't be scanned and stimulators and these sort of things, and here you're thinking, wait a minute, I do this all day every day. They can be scanned, you just got to think outside the box.
With the right way, yeah.
Yeah, that depends on your institution's like gestalt knowledge, like the
Support too,
Yeah,
right?
support. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah,
There's a lot that goes into that eventuality of being able to do all of those things. Me personally, I've only been in the business. Like I haven't. I've only worked as a clinical physicist for a shorter period of time, so I'm not familiar with like not being able to scan certain things like that. Right. So I actually don't share that experience. Is I guess what I'm saying.
Well, it's kind of funny because
But it is good to be able to reach those people, right? So.
Because I know we talked before, kind of off camera, of course, about like your dissertation and what you worked on for your Ph.D. and everything. And it's funny that we bring you on to talk about SAR, and actually what you worked on it's had a lot to do with kind of heating, right?
Oh,
of
yeah.
the body part. You want to talk about that a little bit? I think that's pretty cool.
So Reggie is talking about MR temperature imaging.
Temperature imaging, yeah.
So of all, like what is an image? It's where you have contrast. And so contrast is like T1 contrast, T2 contrast. One of the amazing things MR can do is temperature contrast. Well, how does that happen?
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, so temperature, if you do a phase image, and that means you have a bunch of pixels in an image, and they each have, think of them as little clock dials. So you have a circle and you have a dial, and they're spinning around. If there's no temperature change, the idea of this is that they don't experience a phase change. Their clock dials do not turn. Now, and that's like baseline temperature. If something heats up a degree, 2, 3, or in the case of like laser ablation in brain, it's like increase of 30-ish degrees. those clock dials start spinning more and more and more. And you look at your baseline image where all the clock dials are pointing up. And as you compare like the second time point, the third time point, the fourth time point, you always look at your baseline. Those shifts that have happened are proportional to temperature. And it's pretty accurate and it's pretty fast in terms of you can get like plus or minus a degree Celsius accuracy-ish, and a time realization of, depends who's, the need and the running, but what's running, but it's like 10 seconds per image to 30 seconds per image. They're pretty quick. So you have these like multi-slice temperature images of what's going on and that's used for like monitoring laser ablation in brain or MR focused ultrasounds.
Well, when we were talking about SAR just a second ago, I thought about it and I was like, I wonder if this is how if they're using some sort of similar thing to like figure out what the device, like what is the 2 watts per kilogram factor in that type of device, right?
Like why is it 2 watts per kilo?
Yeah, like how do they decide, all right, this temperature is too much. Let's keep
reaching
it
at the bottom of, this is like me semi-speculating, so grain of salt time, but it's my understanding that the IEC, there's this International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, they have a bunch of very smart people, so physicians, physicists, techs, engineers from companies. It's a lot of engineers from the companies, is my rough understanding. And they get together and look at what standards should be in different. So there's like manufacturing standards. That's why 2 watts per kilo is applicable to GE, Siemens, Philips, all of them, because they're all they're manufacturing their devices according to the IEC standard. And that standard, why is it 2 watts per kilo, is to keep like something like you don't want the core body temperature to go up more than a degree Celsius. And like the periphery, it might be 2 or 3 degrees Celsius in the arms, in the extremities. And it's sort of this model of and there's actually very specific assumptions about this model as I kind of am recollecting. It's like a 25 degree Celsius room with even like a certain humidity set. So that way they're not like sweating through 80% humidity. Like there's even a humidity setting for this. And under that model, if you irradiate a person at normal mode, at 2 watts per kilo for a certain long period of time, they will not ever exceed that 1 degree Celsius. So like what, go look it up yourself. It's kind of like what I'm saying, but like it's modeled after that kind of idea. And then first level mode, they'll eventually start heating up if you.
Right. Well, and then when they determine a device is unsafe, right? It's not that it's been scanned and they realize, okay, we can't do this on anyone else. It's like it's actually going through the similar model, right? They're saying, hey, this is going through the roof.
So a lot of the testing comes from ASTM, is kind of like what I'm familiar with. And they have testing standards of like, they have recommendations. What helps is like, it goes back to if you're a device maker, you're going to the FDA and you want to label this device.
Right.
You can point to, we tested this device using ASTM standards, and the FDA will respect that because they know what ASTM standards are.
Right.
And this is sort of like a general plug for like standards in your life everywhere. So like there's standards for the SAR from your cell phone, by the way. That's kind of weird. Like there's testing.
That's a nice little,
Yeah, there's SARs everywhere, and there's like certain testing standards for that. Or like,
so SAR monster is real.
The SAR monster, it's everywhere. It's in the dark right over there. And so the idea is that because you tested your device under those standards, the FDA will recognize what that means.
I see. Nice. Wow. Now I know, man.
I didn't come prepared to like just spout lore on that.
We like it.
This is good. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I mean, we dove into SAR quite a bit. We sure wanted to cover that on today's topic.
Right.
Do you think that we didn't cover anything?
We didn't talk about SED.
Okay.
So specific energy dose, that is just SAR multiplied by time. Think of it as the quantity of energy you dumped in. Okay. And another way of thinking about it is power, SAR. Power is like a river, and SED is like it being collected in a lake or something like that. It's
how
like
big that lake is.
It's filling it up. And there are now, the IEC now has a limit for SED, which is something like 14 kilojoules per kilogram.
In what time frame, though?
And that's exactly the right way to think about it, Robert, is that it would take, at normal mode, so 4 watts per kilo, it takes about an hour. Maybe it does exactly. Again, look it up. It takes like exactly an hour to hit that SED limit. And that's for these very new MRIs that have that in their software to be tracking SED.
SED, right.
And it'll go ding, and you have to
Pause.
they have to pause and do stuff. So what does SED mean, though? Right now, I haven't actually had to work with SED in like a meaningful way. And that's, what do I mean by that? I mean that, so SAR, if it's way too high, you could imagine I'm going to burn this person or that kind of thing. With SED, with way too much, it's always about what time frame did I dump that energy in. And why is SED a good idea? It makes sense to me from the standpoint that, like, if you've hit the SED limit, you've scanned them for an hour at 4 watts per kilo, you should probably, like, check out what's going on. Like, that makes sense to me. And more importantly are people with thermoregulatory limitations, which we actually haven't mentioned yet.
I'm curious about that because I've had this conversation multiple times. So would a severe fever be a contraindication
Absolutely.
in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah.
Right.
That's funny because I've had this scenario happen multiple times where I, as the tech, said maybe we shouldn't scan this patient right now because they have a severe fever, being 101 or
Right.
plus.
Yep.
And I was, questioned by my peers, like, where have you heard this? Why would we not? And I'm like, well, why wouldn't? I mean, we're putting them in a microwave essentially. Right.
So we mentioned that, like, the goal for normal mode is not to raise the core body temperature by more than like a degree C. Again, whatever the true standard is, right. it is what it is. But there's this amount you're not trying to exceed. And with a fever, they've already exceeded that. You're already starting at a disadvantage. And right. Their body isn't going to be able to dump that heat off as easily. Other things like sometimes diabetes, sometimes like pregnant patients. There's all sorts of reasons.
Right.
I'll tell you a funny story, a quick one. Not funny, but more frustrating for me. But I had the same thing.
Plenty of frustrating
stories. 101 plus fever. It was an inpatient in a different facility. Won't name names, but the place that I work had a 3T and a 1.5. Well, they wanted me to send for this patient. I told them no, and then I'm being questioned by my peers. Why didn't you send for this patient? And then I tell them. And then they said, find me this info that says we can't scan them if they have a high fever. And I said, okay. Well, so in the time for me to look for it, it took more than 24 hours to find this info. Well, I come back the next day, and they've got that patient on the table. And I said, oh, did fever go down? And they said, no. I'm like, well, what
changed?
You put them on the 3T when you could have put on the 1.5. And I look into the room, and I said that they're covered in warm blankets. I'm like, so you gave somebody with the severe fever warm blankets, put them on a 3T and scan them for an hour? I'm like, okay.
Right.
Okay.
And what are the risks of going beyond the SAR limits, right? Like,
well, it's thermal damage to the body, which is often going to manifest in the skin quickest. So, like, where do burns come from? One is like current loops. That's where you have, like, think of a copper wire, a loop, and because of the induction in that environment, it can start a current going in that, and that will cause a burn. But I've been mostly talking from the perspective of it. A very lazy analogy is just being in a microwave. Like you're just heating up everything that's in there from the MRI. And I'm kind of blanking on, like, you're just heating. Right? Yeah, you're just heating everything up. And
but when they want like a defined, like, well, tell me where I can't do this, and it's like, well, I'm going to need a little bit of time to find that info.
And that's right. I would say I encourage people, if you're dealing with the idea of a fever, you'd need, the things I would consider doing is different practices, different procedures, but you might talk to the physician of the risk benefit of getting that image. You might look up how high their fever is, these kinds of things.
What type of sequences you're going to be running on them. Well,
right.
And then, too, like, when you put someone like that in the scanner, does the scanner right off the bat know that this person's at like 101 degree temperature, right?
No,
so it's going to base it off of the wrong baseline, right? Like
That's right.
a flat baseline where not really.
And I think that's the important thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that putting a person with a high-ish fever is going to necessarily lead to burns, but the risk is
Drastically
increased. Yeah, that's right. And we also, you'd mentioned 3T versus 1.5. That's absolutely a reason. So that's also a square relationship. So flip angle, if you go from 90 to 180, you doubled the flip angle, you quadrupled the SAR. Same thing with
Field strength.
for field strength. So if you go from 1.5 to 3T, it's about 4 times as much.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah, I do kind of want to backtrack for a second. You said that temperature imaging kind of intrigued me quite a bit. I never really,
me too. I was like, man,
never heard anything about that. So, so
super cool.
Very specialized.
mind you, I just heard about it right now. So in my mind, it's still processing it, right? So I'm trying to visualize it.
Right.
Are you talking about actual imaging that temperature differences will actually create the contrast in itself within the image? Okay. So that said, now I'm thinking, how could this be used in clinical use, right? So one way I'm thinking is like, I know when we do anesthesia patients and we're concerned about RF burns, usually it's in the shoulders and it depends on if they're big and they're touching the board. And by the way, you should always put pads in, make sure that they're not touching the board. But, but what we do at our facility, every 10 minutes we go in, we do temperature checks. And really what we're doing is we're literally with our bare hands feeling their bare skin to see if there's an increase in temperature. It's very subjective. But I'm wondering if you could just do like a
quantify that.
20-second look, if you will, an image of it, see where the hot spots are, because I'm picturing it would look somewhat similar to like a PET scan or something, right?
Like a temperature map, right?
It looks like, the way you typically display them looks like a FLIR, looks like a temperature image.
Yeah, like almost like a Doppler.
Red is hot, green, yellows.
Yeah, like a Doppler.
Like a Jackson Pollock. But like that would be that'd be probably a pretty good practical use for it, like to actually check for skin. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Would that be applicable?
Like
and that is less subjective. It's more defined, right? Like, because if I go in there and I say
process it in real time,
some of the limitations of this technology, it needs a baseline, and so. You always have to like look back to whatever your baseline was at the beginning of the imaging. And usually there's things that the scanner's doing that will break that baseline. That's one of the primary challenges to like actually using this technology. And to some degree, I would hope it's easier just to feel their skin and you just know that it's hot and sweaty or not. But again, but
what about like when you got the skin to skin on a larger patient with the thighs or something like that, and you're maybe not always thinking to check that.
Right.
You're always looking the shoulders or the elbows.
Well, and then you have to like move the table and then image there. All of these things are going to break a baseline.
I see what you're saying.
Right, because you got to be ISO.
You took the fun out of it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I like how you're thinking.
I still feel like there's, like it could be developed into like real world use.
Right.
And it is for mostly monitoring these like thermal ablations.
And then I'm also wondering again, how would this be used, and like what could it be indicative of? Like, for example, my mind, I'm wondering if like maybe like if a patient has some sort of infection in their body, if that is a different temperature.
People have looked at this to try and diagnose breast cancer a little bit.
Okay.
Nice.
Not all that successful. Sorry if someone's working on it right now. I bet you're doing great work. But,
you can tell you're a scientist.
Yeah. So anyway, one idea out there for diagnosing breast cancer is to use a very precise thermal IR camera. And for very surface level activity, cancer activity, you can kind of find it. And the idea is maybe you can do the same thing with these MRIs. To my knowledge, that's not really a thing I would try doing.
Well, I feel like too with the whole idea of let's get higher field strength. SAR is going to play a bigger role every time, right?
It is.
I wanted to kind of touch up on 7T.
One of the biggest challenges for 7T, and in my last recollection, it's only FDA cleared at 7T for head and knee. Part of that is to do with you can get with head and knee, where are the transmit coils, TR coils for those? It's head and knee already. So you can like keep the SAR right there. One of the more critical technologies out there is what's called parallel transmit.
Oh, yeah.
Parallel transmit is on even 3T scanners right now. And it's a really good, it's a tech that I like a lot. I like it for other reasons than just SAR, but one of the advantages for SAR is if you have one RF excitation pattern and another one that's like complementary to it, you can shape it to where you can get the flip angles you need in your imaging area while not having too much SAR on the surface, on the edges.
Yeah.
So if you have one, let's talk about one transmit. You'll get your flip angles that you need in the middle, and at the edge, you aren't really imaging or you don't care about it, and those flip angles and the SAR and the B1 RMS can be pretty different than what you're intending to image. When you look at 7T, that is like exaggerated, that it's very much, this pattern is exaggerated, and so that's why they've moved to parallel transmit solutions.
Man, that's super cool. Yeah.
And then when you add up all those different components, it makes the shape you want.
Right. I've seen it used for like ICs and things like that to kind of just get that zoomed in view for your ICs and not have to worry about everything else and still have a super high resolution, which is really nice. And I feel like they reformat so much better too when it, use the parallel transmit. But that's cool. I didn't know it could be utilized to help with, the spread of SAR.
That's right.
That's so interesting. Nice.
Or there's some really low field things coming out. So there's like it's just for head, and it's mostly for like a neuro ICU situation. There's this like permanent magnet base thing that you can wheel around in an ICU environment, and it has really
hyper something. Yeah.
It has low SAR, or 0.5 T is like an idea that might come out, and that would have really low SAR.
Oh, nice. So the key really to SAR is pretty much use the lower field that you have, pretty much.
Yeah, 1.5 is 1.5. Most places you're gonna use your 1.5.
Right. Nice. And that's the same for implants, right? So which I feel like SAR is synonymous with implants. A lot of the labeling,
the labeling for those implants is gonna say.
It's gonna say 1.5 or something, right? Nice.
Interesting stuff. I don't know why my family thinks this is boring. I certainly don't, but I think we kind of covered it, right? I mean, do you think we did? I do want to kind of just end the conversation with the fun part, a fun segment. Let people get to know the fun side of you.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up. Go ahead and fill this awkward K-space time. I had it. Where'd it go?
Did you flip the angle?
Oh, that's a lame. There we go. So, lightning round. This is just really quick.
Okay.
Can we call it like pulse? We got to work on lightning round name. All right, well, go ahead.
I like it though. Come on, think of it.
Well, something more MRI related, right?
What would you say?
Haste.
Ooh.
With no delay. He looked me dead in the eye.
Yeah.
Haste.
There's a pulse sequence abbreviation for everything you ever cared about.
Right there it is.
Yeah.
All right, going real quick. Texting or talking?
Talking.
Favorite day of the week?
Thursday, if I'm not just going to say Saturday.
That's my worst day, but favorite city in the U.S. besides the one you live in?
Ooh. I mean, I liked living in Houston while I was going to grad school.
Nice.
Nickname your parents used to call you?
Sam, but not Sammy. I can tell you what it was not. Not Sammy.
Okay.
But just Sam.
Okay. Last song you downloaded?
Andrew Bird's, and now I'm kind of blanking. Anyway, Andrew Bird is the artist.
Okay. Would you rather be able to speak every language in the world or talk to animals?
Talk to animals, because you can always translate to people.
Yeah, by the way, thanks for playing along and not thinking this is... favorite holiday?
Oh, I'm getting angry every minute. I like Thanksgiving a lot.
I thought you were going to say wife's birthday, but...
Oh, man.
No,
so I wanted to ask you what your first celebrity crush is.
Never.
Really?
Never.
You never had a poster up on your wall?
No.
J-Lo? You were
Deny it all.
J-Lo, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, take the fun out of it. Favorite junk food? Don't tell me you don't eat junk food.
Favorite junk food? I mean, I had some onion rings that I was like, man, I've been missing onion rings. Like good beer-battered onion rings.
Ooh, nice. Yeah.
Do you do with ketchup?
Don't. Like lots of pepper.
Yeah.
Ranch?
I'm not a dip kind of person.
Oh, okay. understandable.
I'm definitely a dip kind of a guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but definitely not ketchup. All right, well, that pretty much covers it. Reggie, anything to say before we let them out?
Yo, thank you for joining us. It's great. I know the SAR monster hunts a lot of us MRI techs out there, especially if you have a 3T at your facility. So hopefully this will help out a few people for sure.
And not everybody has a Dr. Fahrenholtz in his
Exactly.
shoulder.
On
Hanging
the
out.
shoulder, right?
Thank you, Dr. Fahrenholtz. We appreciate your time. And thank you to the audience. We appreciate you guys
Yes.
watching. We
Thank you,
appreciate you
Dave.
subscribing. Please tell your friends about us. Hit like. I think we have a merch store. I don't know. Reggie?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Zone 3 Podcast. We are out.
Bye.